Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I'm your host, Maryann Petri, and there is a non-denominational retreat weekend at the Resolution Center of Jacksonville, Florida. This will be a time of support and renewal for parents and grandparents on the journey of parental alienation. It's standing strong in resilience, paving the way for good health and a great future. This will take place April 22nd through the 24th at the Resolution Center in Jacksonville, Florida, and I will have the notes in the podcast. Right now, I have a brand new guest. His name is Randy Flood. He has specialized in providing specialized psychologist services for individuals and families involved in family and criminal court since 1992. He provides forensic evaluations, parenting coordination, and parent-child reunification counseling at the Fountain Hill Center in Grand Rapids, particularly when resist and refuse dynamics are present in parent-child contact problems, including cases of parental alienation and or domestic violence, child abuse, and neglect. He is also the founder and director of Men's Resource Center of West Michigan, a center specializing in mental health services for males, including programs for men who perpetrate domestic violence, sexual abuse, and fathers targeted by parental alienation. Mr. Flood offers testifying and non-testifying expert consultation for attorneys and organizations in his areas of expertise. He also provides coaching for rejected and targeted parents throughout the country, as well as helping parents cope and navigate the world of custody and parenting time litigation. He is the co-author of 2 books, a prolific speaker, media consultant, and trainer at regional, national, and international conferences. Randy has been happily married for 35 years. His adult son and daughter are both married with small children, blessing him with 2 granddaughters and another granddaughter due in April. So I welcome you to the show, Mr. Flood. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me, Maryann.
I'm glad. So how did you get involved in all of this? This is like massive, especially the litigation and all of that.
Well, I did an internship back in 1991 that was a forensic psychological practice. And so I was able to get introduced into doing what I ended up doing for my professional career by working and being trained in that forensic practice where they had contracts with front of the court here in Michigan to do custody and parenting time evaluations. And
Yeah.
so that was the beginning of it all. Was then when I did my training in a forensic practice.
So you kind of got sucked into it.
Well, yeah, I wasn't really necessarily, planning on doing that. But once I got involved, I started realizing how many families that I could impact and be involved in it. And I actually enjoyed the investigative process and the analytical process involved in doing these evaluations. And so it kind of, I found it found me. And from there, I just began to specialize and get more and more training after I completed my internship so I could get more training. Because I think this is such a specialized part of psychology. You don't go into master's and doctoral level programs learning this kind of about these kind of dynamics and these kind of issues. You have to get trained through organizations such as the Association of Family Conciliation Courts and the Parental Alienation Education Group, different professional organizations that provide these kind of trainings.
So are you connected to like other specialists like Dr. Mark Roseman, other like Dr. Burnett?
Yeah, Dr. William Burnett, Amy Baker, folks like that we see on the conference circuit and involved in critical discussions on these matters. And so, yeah, those are, colleagues, shall I say.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do with a parent that says, well, parental alienation doesn't exist? They're just using that in a courtroom as an excuse to remove a child.
Well, I don't think the science backs up their position.
Mhm.
They might be misinformed, or what you do see in situations like this. I have a history, and I can say this, of working in the field of domestic violence and also working in the field of child custody and parenting time. And back in the 90s, I would involve myself in these professional conferences, and neither group wanted to acknowledge the existence of the other.
Mhm.
And and now I think there is a little more intersections of those disciplines. And I think that people who are strong advocates of domestic violence or child abuse and neglect, they get a little nervous about people using parental alienation wrongfully or erroneously as a defense
Mhm.
from and being held accountable for their abusive and neglectful behavior. And so they feel like they just want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they say, and try to discount the reality of parental alienation because it has perhaps been misused in a particular trial or in a particular case.
Do you think these judges are really adept at, um, how do I say, pinpointing a liar who's calling out parental alienation?
I don't think that, I think judges are human beings. Let's start there, and realize that some are trained and will acknowledge this umbrella that I talked about, and you mentioned in my introduction, which is now, there used to be this divisiveness in these kind of camps between the domestic violence, the estrangement camp, shall we say, children who are resisting and refusing parenting time for legitimate reasons because of parental unfitness. And
Mhm.
on the other side of the spectrum, when someone is resisting and refusing, is parental alienation. Now we have this umbrella called resist and refuse dynamics. And now we're supposed to actually assess with multiple hypotheses why a child might be resisting and refusing. So it depends on a judge's training, it depends on a custody evaluator's training to know whether you're going to get a good evaluation that's really going to look at the facts and look at all theories and all hypotheses rather than just going into it with a confirmation bias because I know about domestic violence or I know about parental alienation, so then I'm going to look for the facts or the data to prove my bias.
Mhm. You know, do you find it, difficult to do to spot a liar? Do you know when someone's really lying to you? Y
Well, as a psychologist, we use different psychological tests and different ways of kind of determining whether someone's lying or not. Because you're right, if someone comes into an evaluation and I'm meeting them for the first time, I can have a person be very convincing with their narrative about what something is or isn't, and telling me about their former spouse or their co-parent and painting this picture of their spouse being this horrible individual. But what I do is I don't always assume that the emotions I'm getting in that session and the narrative I'm getting in that session is true and accurate. I just look at that as a narrative from this person, and then I begin a process of truly assessing the veracity of what they're telling me. And as an evaluator, you use the assessments with the individuals, you use clinical assessments with the children and the parents, you use psychological testing, and then you use what we call collateral information, which is you gather, lots of documentation from text feeds to emails to audio visual data to court documents to previous psychological reports, school records, all kinds of information to assess whether someone is telling me the truth or not.
Mhm. So if they're not telling you the truth, um, and they've got a lawyer and they want to, say, get full custody, do you stand there and say, "No, I'm not going along with this?"
I tell them that if I'm doing an evaluation, I tell them that my job is to serve the best interests of the children,
Mhm.
not you or
Mhm.
your attorney. And so I'm going to be doing an evaluation that has a forensic protocol that requires me to approach it with multiple hypotheses, which is a scientific process, and test the hypotheses to tell me what the data is saying about what the truth is, not what you're telling me what the truth is. I'm
Mhm.
not saying you're not being honest with me. Your narrative about what is happening with the children could be fairly spot on and maybe 80-90% accurate. Or what your narrative is might be spacious and might not be actually what is happening, and you're in denial about it, and you're blaming your co-parent or your spouse for the problems when you're actually the contributing factor for why the children's having issues.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, and when you see children, can you tell when they're being coached?
You can typically children who are being alienated versus children who are truly being neglected or abused by an unfit parent. My experience over the years is they present quite differently.
Mhm.
And the research is actually showing that as well in terms of how an abused child or a neglected child approaches an evaluation or approaches the target or rejected parent. One of the simple things that we use, in terms of differentiating whether we're working with an alienated child versus an abused or neglected child is irrational hope versus irrational fear.
Mhm.
And usually with the neglected and abused children, there's just natural design in the way that we're built to want to be with our parents, to want to have access to our parents. And so even in a neglected and abused cases, children, we tend to have, as professionals, often have to manage irrational hope, and that young children, even adolescents, will have this false idea about what it takes to rehabilitate a parent who has some severe substance abuse problems or severe mental health problems or severe domestic violence problems or sexual abuse problems. And they tend to want to move toward reconciliation too quickly. And so we're dealing what we call with irrational hope. With parental alienation and alienated children, we're often dealing with irrational fear, in that children will present without the appropriate levels of facts and data to support the fear and the level of hatred that they have toward a parent. And so there's different ways in which children present that we actually are looking for. So irrational hope versus irrational fear. Another one is just how they talk to us and whether the narrative that they provide to us, is it based in fact? Is it based in what other types of information I'm gathering from other sources? We assess what is the base rate relationship. So before the divorce and the separation happen, oftentimes you want to look at what is the relationship the child had with that parent before the custody battle started. And usually with alienation, you have a base rate relationship that is either good enough or really quite solid. And then all of a sudden, these allegations start coming on board. So there's different things we look for. Another one is the alienated children tend to speak very robotically and very matter-of-factly about egregious or horrendous things that occurred in the family.
Mhm.
And so it's again that way of having been coached or having been influenced by a loyalty contract with the preferred parent. And so you can have a sense that they're not speaking from their experience. They're not speaking from this somatic actual occurrence that happened in the relationship. It's this narrative that's been infused in them from another source, particularly the favored parent. And with clinical skills and a history of working with different children, you get a sense of what you're dealing with in your office.
Mhm. So when in court and these children are sequestered, I know that like the judge goes in and the attorneys, but do you go in as well, or they don't let you in?
I have them with me in my office alone, and then I have them with parents, and then I meet with jointly for joint sessions. But if the judge is in a trial and they are meeting with the children and doing their own interview, the judge usually does that by him or herself.
Mhm, mhm. You know, with this parental alienation, have you had a child just say, "I never ever wanna see mom or dad, um, again, ever?" And, and I don't know if you have this situation where you're calling the 2 parents to come and be, like, I don't know, like family counseling? I don't know if you do that or go there. Go there.
Yeah, well, reunification counseling can be something that's done in cases, but usually, again, children who are alienated, if I'm assessing an alienated child, I can even use the classic magical wand. If I had a magical wand in my office and I could make let's say it's a mom, um, and I could get all these problems you shared with me with your mom, all these issues you shared, if I could make all that magically go away, and your mom could be the most loving, most caring, most steady, most reliable person in your life, what kind of parenting time would you like then? An alienated child often would just say, I don't care what she does. I don't care what you can do to
Mhm.
help her out. I don't want anything to do with her. I hate her and I'm done with her. So
Mhm.
there's just, again, no future orientation oftentimes of the alienated child. There's nothing that parent can do to restore the relationship. And that's
Mhm.
often, but with an abused and neglected child, they would love for me to have a magical wand. You mean you can make my dad stop drinking, and you can
Mhm.
make him dependable so that when we go to his house on the weekends, he's not going to pass out anymore? Yep,
Mhm.
then my magical wand will do that. If I can do that, well, then I want to have parenting time with my daddy. I
Mhm.
mean, so an estranged child is going to want something that can be fixed. They have a sense of being able to follow that natural affinity toward wanting to be with a parent if I can fix them.
Mhm. So is there any hope for, these parental alienation cases that, when a kid is saying, "No way, I don't wanna speak to my mom or dad," or whoever, because they've been so brainwashed and Stockholm syndromed?
Right. Yeah. Well, we tend to see, I tend to look at alienated children on a spectrum of mildly alienated to moderately alienated and severely alienated. And so the mildly alienated child will speak poorly of the rejected parent around certain people and around the preferred parent. But then when they transition to the alleged rejected parent that's unfit, they transition and do quite well. And they will integrate, assimilate, and the parenting time will go fine until they're starting to transition back to their preferred parent. Then they start shutting down a little bit, and getting cold and kind of detached to prepare themselves to going back to this parent where they have to reject and show dislike to the other parent. So they go back and forth between the court-ordered parenting time. It's stressful for them, but they're managing that. A
Mhm.
moderately alienated child will do the same as uh, a mildly alienated child, but once they get to the parenting time with the rejected parent, they still do not adjust. They still act out. You will hear about these kids staying and isolating in their bedroom, not wanting to get involved in some of the activities for the weekend.
Mhm.
Um, they will get oppositionally defiant with the rejected parent and say
Mhm.
horrible things to the parents. I mean, and it's actually quite stressful and quite a hostile environment. And
Mhm.
in that setting, a lot of rejected parents will make mistakes. And
Mhm.
you might have read my article about the common mistakes that rejected parents make. And I kind of specialize in helping rejected parents manage that, because good people with reasonable coping skills who are being hated and rejected by their children that they love and that the children they had a really good base rate relationship with, it's highly stressful. And it's easy to take those things that they're saying and doing as personal, and then begin to develop what we would call a combative relationship with
Mhm.
your alienated children, which then makes it worse. So that is a moderately alienated child. A severely alienated child is basically doing everything the mild and moderate children are doing, but will not stay for parenting time. These kids are acting out in such a way that they're running away.
Mhm.
They're refusing to get into vehicles to go to the rejected parent's house. They're defying court orders. They've seduced a professional. to write a letter or testify in court on their behalf, and they become what they call negative advocates.
Mhm.
And so the judge is saying, well, we need a period of time of cooling off. So there's not such combativeness that we're hearing about where the child's running away and spending a whole weekends in their bedroom. Let's just let this child cool off, and maybe they'll start having parenting time later. And in an alienation case, that's the worst thing you could do. Time
Right.
is the enemy, and you essentially allow the alienation to bake longer in the oven and
Mhm.
become more crystallized. Um, and so that is a more severely alienated child who's not only articulating hate and opposition, they are actually successfully manifested that, and they're no longer doing parenting time.
Why don't the judges understand this?
Because most mental health professionals and judges are historically trained in the estrangement model. They're trained in how to deal with families where children are responding to abuse and neglect, and so they're wanting to approach it from a place of protection. They are wanting to protect children from bad people, shall we
Mhm.
say,
Mhm.
and they don't understand alienation because that is very counterintuitive to their
Mhm.
training, especially for mental health professionals who get children who come in to sessions and talk about these horrific things that this parent's doing. And children, mental health professionals who aren't trained in alienation will hear what these children are saying, and then they want to advocate for their what they say are their best interests of reducing that parenting time with this terrible parent. And little do they realize they are being seduced into becoming a negative advocate, and they are not protecting children. They're becoming an obstructive gatekeeper to children having access to a good parent.
And it's also, you know, the parents and the grandparents that are really suffering, the grandparents, do you counsel them at all? I mean, do they come to you with, "We haven't seen Johnny in 8 months, this isn't fair, what can be done?"
Right. Yeah, usually that's part of the symptoms again of a alienated child, and as the alienation grows, it becomes more. It's like a cancer. It's like an emotional cancer that starts to become metastatic to
Right.
the whole family system, and it grows, and it starts affecting extended family members from again base rate relationships with grandparents, with cousins, with aunts and uncles,
Mhm.
friends of moms, friends of dads that they used to have all this relationships with and affinity and fun and traditions. They start rejecting all of that because it's associated with the targeted parent. And so, yes, grandparents can also be impacted. When I do evaluations, I will oftentimes interview grandparents because they're being rejected as well, and they provide really helpful information as to helping me figure out that it's an alienation case when they can provide some of the background information for me.
Now, in cases of where there's been false accusations by CPS,
Right,
um, and let's say there's let's say the parent is exonerated from the first one, but then another one comes down the pike a couple days later, and would how do you help these people that I mean, because this can happen to men or women, and,
right, yep,
I mean, it's just such a mess. How do you, uh, help them with these and they're in the middle of a trial too, to
right,
make it worse, you know?
right. Well, that's how child protective services they tend to get weaponized in alienation cases. And again, people alienating parents realize the power of these allegations, and so they
Mhm,
will use CPS. And unfortunately, hopefully this is going to change. I just did a recent training locally here in all the child protective service workers to help them understand what parental alienation is.
mhm,
And I'm trying to help CPS understand it in such a way that they could actually begin considering it as a form of psychological abuse toward children.
Mm-hmm.
They have a mental injury for when a parent is psychologically abusing a child in a direct way, like say an intact family who's not going through divorce, and you have a mom and dad, or say a mom or dad who's psychologically abusing children, terrorizing them, calling them names, and doing all this horrific stuff. There's usually language for child protective service workers to use where they can substantiate for mental injury. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be just physical injury, it could be mental injury. But with parental alienation, they don't know how to make that assessment, and they're not trained to. So there's this hope that, like we do with Munchausen by proxy, when we're
Mm-hmm.
assessing that, usually a CPS worker will involve a mental health professional who specializes in that syndrome of Munchausen by proxy, so they can work in collaboration to rule in and rule out this
Mm-hmm.
complicated, it's really hard to tell. Am I working with a parent who really has a complicated child with all this physical problems and they're going to multiple doctors, and this parent's being protective and that's what's going on? Or is this parent inducing these physical symptoms in a child to create this, Munchausen? That's the same kind of complicated family systems dynamic you're dealing with alienation. You need professionals who understand it, who can work together.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the best that we have in child protective services workers is they at least unsubstantiate cases where it isn't occurring. So there's sexual abuse allegations or physical abuse allegations, and they go in there. But the problem is that you can have multiple unsubstantiations per family.
Mm-hmm.
The record I have in my history of working on this with these families is 23 unsubstantiated abuse cases, but still no rule in of alienation, just multiple unsubstantiations.
Right.
And I've had kids where I've done evaluations. I remember this one case I did evaluation where this poor little girl had to submit to 3 different physical examinations for sexual abuse, basically, going through a rape kit and having to take samples and all that. And I did the evaluation and concluded it was an alienation case. And in that case, the judge did take custody away from the mom in this particular case, because my evaluation provided the judge with enough information for the judge to make that decision. But the CPS workers were not able to make that call. And the child was unfortunately exposed to a lot of investigation. And it just over evaluated. It's just a really sad case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think CPS, well, I don't think they're very educated in this parental alienation problem. I hear from parents that they're getting only one-sided interviews. They're being treated badly by the caseworker, or the sometimes when they order visitation, the parent is treated even badly by the person who's handling the visitation. It's just such a big mess.
Right. Yeah, and that's true. And again, I don't fault the CPS worker who's not properly trained, because when you get a job as a professional for a state organization, it's incumbent upon the organization to make sure that they provide proper training and make sure that their workers are properly credentialed to be able to handle the kinds of delicate allegations and issues that with children and families. So I think individual caseworkers are doing the best they can with the training that they have. But I think we have probably a larger, more systemic problem that needs to be addressed within the system to equip these caseworkers with the proper knowledge and protocols and even access to other professionals to help them in cases where it seems like you might have an alienation case going on. Because we do know that there's false negatives in cases where there's actual sexual abuse or physical abuse, where they don't have a child who's willing to talk quite yet. And then the abuse continues to go on. And then the second or third investigation, they finally have enough evidence. And so you have problems both ways. It's not just in the side of alienation of trying to figure out how to best help children.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Now, you've written a book.
Yeah.
And could you tell us about how long did it take to write and research and all that?
Well, I haven't written a book specifically on parental alienation yet. That's in the hopper, and I'm currently working on that. It's going to be a book for helping people understand rejected parents of parental alienation, because I think there's just a lot of myths and assumptions made about rejected parents, and there's not a lot of support for them. I think they can come into offices of mental health professionals or in courtrooms after being kind of misunderstood and assumed to be bad. All these false allegations, dealing with the stress of children that they love or who are opposing them and hating them, and they don't appreciate. Professionals don't sometimes appreciate how battered these parents are. I mean, similarly, how Leonora Walker helped professionals in courts understand the battered wife syndrome, because back in the 70s, a similar phenomenon was going on. They'd have this, woman who was enduring years and decades of domestic violence and social isolation and a lack of economic resources, and then they are seen in a courtroom or seen by a professional, and they might have a substance abuse problem, or they might be depressed, or they might not be taking care of the children, or they might be all these things, and they're blaming the victim and not without understanding the context in which she came from. And I think that same kind of idea needs to be applied to alienated parents. We don't excuse them being poor parents or saying things they shouldn't have said or whatnot, but we need to better understand the conditions in which they've been living in, so that we can actually help them get at the core of the problem. So that's the kind of mission I have with this book I want to write up to help rejected parents. I've written about domestic violence, the book Stop Hurting the Woman You Love, and then I've written about toxic aspects of masculinity called Mascupathy, Understanding and Healing the Malaise of American Manhood. And those two books, just from the answer your question, yes, they take a long time to research and to write. So yes, but I plan to engage in the rigors of that again to write this third book.
Do you find that stressful?
It's stressful, but it's important to birth these ideas, right, and incubate these ideas, and to give them life, and I find it a way to contribute and have a larger voice of healing, rather than just as a therapist. I'm kind of hunkered down in my chair working with the individuals or the families before me, but to be able to author an article or a book, or to do a presentation at a conference, or to do a training, just gives me a larger stage and a larger network to reach. And that's very validating and very inspirational to know that that's why we do that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So do women come to you for help as well?
Oh yeah. For women who are being rejected or targeted, I work with both rejected and targeted fathers and mothers. I mean, I do direct the Men's Resource Center, and also work at the Fountain Hill Center. And so I do have access to working with families through the Fountain Hill Center and working with women, but my specialty area of working with men, we do offer services for them for domestic violence, anger management, sexual addiction, things like that. And then we also have a support group for rejected fathers and provide that as well.
Now, do you see a lot of men with explosive anger disorder? Do you notice that more as opposed to other things?
Well, I think that, again, kind of moving to a topic that would take us maybe a little away from your primary mission and what you do with your podcasts and such. But yeah, I do think that I think that men and women both can struggle with not being healthy and effective in their domestic relationships. But I think the socialization process for females and males are quite different historically, but we're doing a little better job, I think, with that these days. But I think men historically have been socialized out of emotional intelligence and intimacy skills. And that, the name of being a real man and your only job is to be a breadwinner and be a competitor on the football field or a basketball court, rather than seeing you're going to be there for your children and for your intimate partners. And you need to have these softer skills, human skills of intimacy and emotional connection, and know how to do that work as well. And they're both important,
Right.
to be able to climb corporate ladders and climb tree forts, you with your kids. I mean, you want to be able to do all of that. And so that's kind of the 21st century ethos, is to raise and train men to be able to be cross-trained into doing domestic relationships and intimacy and parenting, as well as being able to run a business or dig a trench or whatever else you got to do for work.
Well, where can people find your books?
You can find them on the Men's Resource Center website, the menscenter.org. And then you can also find them on Amazon or other places online. You can find my services on menscenter.org. I have a family court and criminal court webpage within the menscenter.org. And then also have information on services we offer at the Fountain Hill Center for counseling and consultation. And both of those places are in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but we're doing a lot of online services, and we're reaching a lot of people via Zoom these days. I mean, the pandemic, one of the benefits of the pandemic, I know we complain a lot about it, but it certainly expedited the process of telehealth and giving us opportunities and different mediums to reach people besides having to physically show up at someone's office.
Right.
Yeah. So that's been good.
That's excellent. So, since it's Valentine's Day, how did you maintain a marriage for 35 years? This is fabulous.
Yeah. Well, I think marriage is a skills-based relationship. I think that, the intoxicating chemicals of attraction, bring us together, in this, what we call romantic love. And Valentine's, kind of specializes or glamorizes this, romantic love, and it's wonderful and great. But I think in order to have real love and to really have intimate connections that are robust and healthy, that takes a lot of effort and time and skill. It just doesn't come with just merely being attracted to someone. That just gets you in the room with them or in bed with them, maybe. But it doesn't get you into, really trying to negotiate life together and understand each other from a place of empathy and compassion, without judgment. And so I think that is something we need to do better at in society, is letting our children know that, marriage is great and wonderful, but be prepared to invest into what it takes to be a good partner. We do that for our jobs, and some of us, have to spend 2, 4, 6, 12, 15 years training to be good at our professions. But all of a sudden, we're just supposed to be attracted to someone, get married, and all of a sudden we're going to be good at it. No, it takes more work and effort than that.
Now, in your work, do you also train people to look at personality disorders or to see them coming when they start dating. And, sure, you're in the love bomb phase, but then this person is going to turn on you. And
Mhm.
the whole, I know people don't want to use the term narcissist, but lately people have been using the term narcissist. Like we haven't heard of this term in, say, the last 10 years, and now it's evolved into, we're using this a lot now.
Yeah. And again, as soon as pop culture picks up on something, they tend to um, overdiagnose it, overuse it. I mean, we went through that with ADHD, when everybody had ADHD, and then, and so I think that you got to be careful that we don't assume just because someone reads an article, on pop psychology websites and says, "Oh, my partner is now a full-blown narcissist." So I do think personality disorders do exist. It
Mhm.
is on the axis 2 of a DSM-5 diagnosis. And so we do look for that in evaluations when we have reject and refuse dynamics and parental alienation going on. We often can see that could be a personality disorder, at least features, whether you have a full-blown disorder or you have traits or features of narcissism or paranoia or histrionic features. Sometimes you have unresolved trauma.
Mhm.
It doesn't necessarily come from a personality disorder, but you can have an individual who has family of origin trauma, and perhaps they weren't protected as a child from an abusive parent, so they go into a marriage and a custody battle with their own projections of the world's a dangerous place, and they project danger onto their ex-spouse, and really they think that they're protecting their children, but they're really protecting their wounded child that wasn't protected in their life as a kid. And so you can have trauma that can be the origin of an alienation process too, not just a personality disorder.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
very sad.
yeah, it is. You can have empathy for understanding how it's happening. Um, if it's not a personality disorder where someone's just being malicious and
Mhm.
vindictive, but you have that unresolved trauma, but still you have to look at the children. And ultimately, in a situation like that, and if a child is being unnecessarily restricted from a good enough parent, or you're infusing your own unresolved fears into your child, so they end up seeing the world in kind of this dark place like you,
Mhm.
then that's where you have to draw the line
Mhm. Right.
and say,
Mhm.
okay, you need to get your own treatment and help so that you can empower your child to see that his or her parent for who they are, rather
Mhm.
than some distortion from your traumatic past.
Mhm. That's
Yeah,
excellent. Definitely.
yeah,
Well,
yeah. I see that. Yeah.
how can people reach you if they need to contact you?
Hmm.
I'm sure people try to contact you because they've got some massive emergency going on and they need you to, to look at their court case.
Yeah, I because I've functioned. So the short answer is that you can just call me. You can go to the website, the fountainhillcenter.org, fountainhillcenter.org, or you go to the menscenter.org. Um, and both of those places, you can reach me, read articles, books, and see the services that I offer.
Mhm.
Our phone number is 616-456-1178. 616-456-1178 to get a hold of us via phone. Um, but I think the thing that I appreciate and have a lot of gratitude about my professional life is I've been able to, first of all, be on both sides of the arena that historically has done battle with each other. Is
Mhm.
it estrangement, abuse, domestic violence, or is it parental alienation? Well, I have expertise in both.
Mhm.
So to me, it's like, well, which one is it? It's like, I don't know. I let the data tell me which one it is.
Mhm.
And so I can integrate those fields into something that's more cohesive. The other thing I have experience in is providing clinical counseling and evaluation programs for both sides. I've done domestic violence groups. I've done sexual addiction and sexual offending groups and such. I've also done evaluations and worked with alienated parents and have identified alienation and have done parenting coordination, where you work with divorcing parents on how to co-parent better and co-parenting counseling. I've done parent-child reunification counseling with estrangement cases and alienation cases.
Mhm.
And so now what I'd like to do is take that expertise and that knowledge and help parents do what we call a product review assessment.
Mhm.
So I assess other professionals' work. So sometimes I have an attorney that will hire me to look at the evaluations that are being done in their case, or looking at the reunification counseling that's being done by a professional and asking me, are they following appropriate protocols? Are they operating from a confirmation bias? Are they doing the appropriate interviews with the children? And so that I can make sure that the judge knows that just because some professional comes to their courtroom and offers an opinion doesn't mean that that opinion is going to be helpful. They might have used an inappropriate protocol to get to that opinion, or they may not be appropriately informed or educated about the wealth of things that they're going to see. I also might do coaching
Mhm.
for a parent who's going through an evaluation, or who's going through litigation, or who's being a rejected parent, so that I
Mhm.
can help them understand why their child is treating them in the way that they are, and give them better strategies and coping skills to manage that. And so when they go into an evaluation or go into the child counselor, they can also present themselves in a way that they're not going in there screaming and yelling, going, "You need to help me," and
Mhm.
they come across as this angry parent.
Mhm.
That's not going to serve them well. So I give them skills to try to approach it more methodically, so they can advocate for their
Mhm.
children and for
Mhm.
their parenting access. So
Definitely.
it's wonderful to be able to see how things have evolved for me, so I can play different roles and help families in different ways.
Oh, I'm so glad you came
Yeah.
on the show. This was excellent.
Yeah. I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, because that's, like I said earlier, these conversations provide opportunities, right, for people
Mhm.
to hear you and I talk about these problems, and then it gives them information that they can use that can be empowering. And so these conversations are really important, and you're providing a place for us to have them.
Mhm. I'd
So
like to
thank
have
you.
you oh, well, I'd like to have you on as a return guest. I know you're very
Yeah,
busy. I know you're
that's
super busy.
yeah, but we can do that and hone in on a particular aspect of some other angle or
Mhm.
whatnot. But yeah, we can do that for
Okay,
sure,
well
Maryann.
well, don't jump off.
Okay.
Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms that in turn perpetuate parental alienation. I am your host, Maryann Petri, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption: Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice: Poems of Truth. Please join us again in the future here with Randy Flood in the future and other exciting guests. Thank you again so much.
All right. Thanks for having me, Maryann.